Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of March of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to discuss with you the polls that the Military Summary team made on the Telegram channel and the YouTube channel. And the question is when talking about Telegram channel, which Russian forces are the most battle-hardened? And there were 5 options. The first option is that Wagner's, the forces that currently storms the vicinity of Bakhmut. There are a lot of forces. We know this brigade for their success in Popasnaya and in vicinity of Bakhmut. The second option was the 144th Division, and this division is currently located in Kremenaya frontline. This on Liman frontline, and this is the brigade who is responsible for support operation in the vicinity of Siversk, and it was support operation while the Wagnerians were pushing and trying to encircle Bakhmut. The third option is 155th Brigade. This brigade we can find on the south of South Donetsk front line. This is brigade who was responsible for storming operation of Vuhledar. We know, and if you remember, we don't know the goals that this brigade had during that attack, but we know that when talking about the ground, and if we assume that the goal of that attack was to establish control over Vuhledar, then we can make a conclusion that this 155th Brigade was defeated during that battle. And the fourth option is First Slavic Division, and this is the forces that currently are trying to encircle Avdiivka, and we see that they managed to achieve success in this area, and some sources are saying that maybe within the next few weeks the Avdiivka is going to be encircled. And as you can see, according to this poll, the first place is for Wagner, the second one is the First Slavic Division, the third place is for 155th Brigade, and the fourth option is 144th Division. When talking about YouTube channel, the options are a little bit different, but mainly the difference is between the third and the fourth place. The first and the second belongs to the same options that we discussed on the Telegram channel. First one is after Wagner, the second one is first DPR Slavic Division, third one is 144th Motorized Brigade, and the final one is after 155th Brigade. If you ask me, I will tell you my opinion. I voted for 155th Brigade, the brigade that were defeated in the vicinity of Vuhledar. I believe that the guys met the toughest goals and toughest target in this special military operation for many reasons, and the most important problem that 155th Marine Brigade met on the Vuhledar front line is 72nd Mechanized Brigade. You know that this 72nd Mechanized Brigade is pretty experienced guys. They were sent here from Bakhmut, by the way, from the Bakhmut front line, if you remember. During the first stage of storming of Bakhmut, when the Russians were attacking Zaitsevo and Kodyma, Zaitsevo, Nikolaevka, Drugaya, this area was under protection of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, and the Wagners couldn't penetrate and pass this area until the Ukrainians took a decision to redeploy this brigade to the south of Ukraine in direction of Vuhledar. This is the first reason why I voted for this 155th Brigade. This is like brigade from far east of Russian Federation. These Marine guys, they're very experienced, and I believe that they had a lot of problems, a lot of losses during the storming operation of Vuhledar. They weren't so successful as Wagnerians or First Slavic Brigade or 144th Brigade that currently pushes the Ukrainians on Liman front line. This is the only in comparison with other brigades who were defeated if we were talking about the targets. But anyway, I voted for them. And another reason why I voted for them is that today we got very important piece of news from this front line. And the thing is that the Russians military authorities took a decision to take off the general of this front line, of this group of Russian army. His first name is Muradov. This general was responsible for Russian offensive operation, storm operation in Pavlovka. Later he was responsible for offensive or storm operation of Vuhledar. And we know, and at least open sources are saying that during both these operations, the Russians had a lot of losses. You we remember the pictures and video and photo confirmations of destroyed vehicle convoys, and a lot of destroyed tanks from the Russian side somewhere on the east of Ugledar. And as the Russian sources are saying that this general was sent on an endless vacation something around a month ago. I don't know who's responsible for the Russian forces on the south, Ugledar and Zaporozhye area currently, but the Russians still haven't informed us about new adoption, about new general. But I see that the Russians understand the problem of the South Donetsk area, they understand the value of this area, and they understand that to defend South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area is a vital question for the entire special military operation, but not just to the Russian army. Maybe even this is the vital question for existence of Russian Federation, because if the Ukrainians are able to defeat the Russians on Zaporozhye front line and to penetrate this area and let's say to reach the Berdyansk or Melitopol, I believe that maybe the entire special military operation will be collapsed automatically. We don't know. This is some kind of box of Pandora that Ukrainians are able to open, and everybody understands this, and this is the reason why the Russians took a decision to change general in this area. Of course, the first reason about the mistakes and problems and failures of the previous general during the previous period of special operation, and the second reason is that there is upcoming greatest counter-offensive operation of the Ukrainians, and the Russians want to be on the safe side, and they want to trust this operation to a person they can rely on, and the person they can feel themselves on the safe side. And one more time, before we continue this discussion, the situation on the ground, I'll remind you one more time that during the special military operation, in comparison with the Ukrainians, the Russians have already changed or make a lot of changes on their military authority structures. And if you remember, during this autumn of the previous year, the first thing that the Russians did, they changed the head of special military operation. They adopted Suvorovikov. And if you remember, the next day when Suvorovikov was adopted as the head of special military operation, the Russians started greatest or massive missiles attack all over the territory of Ukraine. They were attacking energy facilities, power plants, railroad stations, bridges using missiles, and the Russians started doing this exactly the second day when they adopted Surovikin as the head of special military operation. During this year, the Russians did another rotation, let's say general rotation, and they adopted Gerasimov, the head of Russian headquarters, general staff. They adopted him as the head of special military operation. This event took place on the 11th of January of 2023 and 2023, and you remember that during those days, exactly during those days, after ceasefire period, after the Orthodox Christmas, the Russians established control over Solidar within the next few days. So as you can see, when the Russians changes their general within the next few days or at the same time, we see the changing of the strategy and tactic. In the first case, when Surovikov was adopted, the Russians started using missiles against the energy and the critical infrastructure. When the Russians adopted Gerasimov as the head of special operation, within the next few days, the entire Solidar area has fallen, and the Russians, and we see the picture exactly as we see right now. The north of Bakhmut is taken by the Russians, and the Bakhmut itself appeared in the operational encirclement. And today the Russians took a decision to change the general of the south area. So I believe that there are two options what the Russians are trying to achieve. You know that this front line is the most difficult and the most complicated. Why is that? I'll tell you. For example, when talking about Kupiansk-Liman front line, we see that according to the tactic and strategy that the Russians took a decision to use, the Russians are in defense state. They are not pushing. There are small local pushes. The Russians made few attempts to storm the area on Liman front line just with one purpose: to support the Russian forces in Solidar and Bakhmut. So we can see that this is one army, and this army has one target, one goal, and one tactic how they're used by the Russian military authorities. When talking about Donbass, the Russians are pushing all over the front line, starting from Marinka to Bakhmut. And there is one general, one head of this army, so we see the same signature, the same way the Russians are doing their operation in this area. And when talking about South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area, we see two completely different areas. When talking about the South Donetsk area, the Russians need to take control over Ugledar if they want to proceed and to complete the encirclement of Avdiivka and to penetrate the Ukraine's defense orders and to be successful and to complete the special military operation this year. So anyway, if the Russians want to get success during the year, they need to take this area. From the other side, we see Zaporozhye area, and when talking about this area, we know that Ukrainians are preparing their counter-offensive operation in this area, and the Russians need to defeat the Ukrainians in this area without any counter-offensive operation. They just need to defeat and not to allow the Ukrainians to penetrate their defense orders. And these two front lines are under responsibilities of one general, and I believe that this general is going to be adopted very soon, and very soon we're going to know his name, and then he will start act, because he need to show the result. He need to show that the Russian authorities was right when adopting him. So I believe that soon these forces on this front line are going to be activated and they will show us some result. To tell the truth, it's very difficult to determine what exactly they're going to do, but when talking about the global scope, when talking about South Donetsk, they need to take Ugledar, and when talking about Zaporozhye, they need to defeat the Ukrainians. So we'll see whether this new general is able to do this or not. Now let's move to the front lines and let's talk about the situation on the ground. One more time, there are no changes on the ground. There are very heavy clashes in the vicinity of Avdiivka. There are very heavy clashes in the vicinity of Bakhmut. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area. Mainly, the icons are from the south. The Russians are trying to push and trying to cross two streets like Mariupolskaya streets and Shirokaya street. These two streets trying to get inside the central part of Bakhmut, trying to push the Ukrainians back from this area. Furthermore, today we got piece of news that Prigozhin, the head of Wagnerians, visited the combat line. He was here at school number 5, so as you can see, very close to the combat line. And I believe that if he visited this area, I believe that maybe this map is not updated. Maybe neither of the map is updated correctly, because I don't think that he would risk so much trying to get right exactly to the combat line. I believe that the combat line is far, very far from this area, somewhere, let's say, in the vicinity of this stadium, because or he's immortal or he believes that he's immortal, but to be right on front of sniper area where the enemy sniper is able to shut you down is a suicide thing if the situation is like this. Furthermore, if you know, today the head of Ukrainian Air Infantry Army Syrsky visited Bakhmut as well, so we can say that two heads of two opposite armies were something around in kilometer from each other. The Prigozhin was at school number 5 and Syrsky were somewhere inside Bakhmut. They were giving some kind of orders. They were trying to navigate the coordinate forces before upcoming greatest battle for Bakhmut. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours on Donbass front line, Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost more than 400 soldiers, 18 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems, 1 Grad and 1 D-20 howitzer. Furthermore, according to information received from the Ministry of Defense, this number, 400 soldiers losses, doesn't include the number of losses of Ukrainians during the battle for Bakhmut. I don't know why, but the Russians took a decision to hide these numbers or not to include these numbers into their reports. And when talking about these 400 losses among the manpower, the Russians mainly were talking about the area between, let's say, Marinka and Seversk without including Bakhmut. So imagine yourself, we know that there is just two areas where we can find the heaviest clashes, and I'm talking about Mariinka and Avdiivka. And according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the losses of the Ukrainian side during the previous 24 hours was around 400 soldiers. Furthermore, today the Ukrainian authorities took a decision to block Avdiivka from their side. They took a decision not to allow any press units to visit Avdiivka. There is no way to enter this town. There is just a way to get out from this town. Furthermore, the Ukrainian authorities took a decision to evacuate some government authorities, government offices, government services in this town, and they took a decision to leave there just an army. They still have this possibility using the road through Lastochkino, Orlovka, Umanska, and then moving to Pokrovsk. Now they're doing this evacuation process, and that means that Avdiivka has a lot of problems. Furthermore, the Institute of Study of War reported today that it's like their suggestion. I'm not saying you to believe them or not, it's up to you, but the Institute of Study of War reported that maybe there is a very high chances that the Russians are going to take a decision to redeploy Wagnerians from Bakhmut front line in direction of Avdiivka with one purpose: to establish final control over Avdiivka. And Wagnerians will be replaced in Bakhmut with the real Russian army. We know that sooner or later there are going to be the greatest battle for Bakhmut. Syrsky, the general of infantry army of Ukraine, have already deployed a lot of forces in this area. You will see that. Let's take a look at this map. The number of brigades and battalions that located in the vicinity of Bakhmut. We know that the number of Ukrainian forces is around 80,000 soldiers, and there is just one solution how to solve these problems is to start greatest unblocking operation of Bakhmut. So that's why I believe that the Russians understand that they need to save Wagnerians, because it's a stormtroopers and it's their price. They're priceless. The stormtroopers is always priceless. This is the most important value on any war. So that's why the Russians took a decision to save these forces and to send their regular army to stop any counteroffensive operation from the Ukrainian side in this area. Maybe it's just a speculation. If you ask me, I'll give you my opinion. I don't see any reason why the Institute of Study of War could do some kind of speculation based on nothing, because if they were saying that, let's say, Wagnerians are completely defeated, we could say that some kind of speculation, but they're saying that the Russians are going to replace before the greatest Ukrainian unblocking operation. It's a very interesting piece of information, just asking you to pay attention. We'll follow this, we will understand what is going to be next, and I believe that this week, by the end of this week, we're going to see the final picture or the beginning of the final picture of Donetsk frontline battle. So one more time, the Ukrainians took a decision to evacuate their forces from Avdiivka. As you can see, there is an icon on the Western sources map saying that there are no more entrance, there are no more way to enter Avdiivka. And as you can see, the Russians continue developing their bridgehead according to the Western sources map. According to this map, the Russians have established control over the towns Novokalinova and let's say a part of Beta-Agra Invest, and the Russians are pushing in direction of Keramic. This is the only map that confirms this information. I haven't seen this report on any other map, so we need just to discuss this because of something interesting that maybe to happen during the previous 24 hours. Anyways, you can see the corridor, the distance between these two areas is less than 6 kilometers. This area is under complete fire control, and I believe that even if the Ukrainians took a decision to evacuate the personnel from Avdiivka, maybe some kind of special operation to evacuate not NATO generals, NATO officers under cover of civilians, because they understand that maybe it start to counting days on fingers before Avdiivka is going to be completely encircled. Anyway, I believe that by the end of this week, where the fog of war will be reduced in this area, and we will see a bit better picture and better understanding of Avdiivka. Now let's move to the South Donetsk area. The Russians are saying that, as you can see, there are no changes, but there are still some kind of artillery duels and so on. And when talking about Zaporozhye Zaporozhye and South Donetsk area. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system D-20, without any changes on the ground. The same situation we can find on Kherson front line. There are also artillery duels. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians recently started movement and redeployment of their forces along the Dnipro River. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians they are really planning to cross the river, or maybe they're doing some kind of picture so the Russians can think and will think that Ukrainians are going to cross. But anyway, there is a super concentration of Ukrainian forces along the Dnipro River, and they're trying to show, or maybe to force the Russians to think that they're going to cross the river. From the Russian side, they're bombing and shelling the bank of the river heavily, and as a result of those bombings and artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system Gvozdika. Now let's go to the north and let's discuss Liman and Kupinsk front line. As you can see, there are heavy clashes, very heavy clashes, and mainly very heavy artillery duels. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians moved and deployed here very fresh artillery forces with the Polish howitzers, Krab howitzers, and the Russians started hunting for them. Furthermore, I believe that when talking about, in particular about Kupinsk and Liman front line, this is the most experienced and powerful front lines when talking about artillery duels. There were a lot of days about Kupinsk front line when the Russians reported that during this or that 24 hours they haven't destroyed even a single artillery system, and not because they couldn't get those artillery systems. The thing is that the Ukrainians lost a lot of artillery systems, so that's why they didn't try to establish or redeploy more artillery systems in this area. So as a result of clashes on the Kupinsk-Liman front line, when we calculate both losses, the Ukrainians lost around 150 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 4 artillery systems. 1 Krab, 1 Akatse, and 2 D-30 howitzers in this area, but also, as you can see, without any changes on the ground. I don't know about the future, about the destiny of Makeivka. The Russians destroyed the bridge in this area. The sources were saying that the Russians started storming this town, that they managed to destroy few pontoon bridges across Zheribets River, but we see that the Ukraine still controls this town, and without any progress from the Russian side. As you can see, this picture haven't been changed since the previous 24 hours. The Russians report about some missiles attacks in Kramatorsk and Slaviansk. As a result of those attacks, few buildings, offices were destroyed, and the Russians are saying that as a result of those attacks, a lot of Ukrainian officers, soldiers were buried under the ruins. Furthermore, today the Ukrainian sources were saying about, if you remember, a few weeks ago, the Ukrainians under the flags of Russian Free Regiment crossed the border with the Russian Federation and established control for a few hours over 2 villages on the border with Russia. And you remember that case, that operation, and later, within the next few days after that case, the Russians made another missile attack all over the entire Ukraine, and they used their Jaggers or Kinjal missiles, and the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine confirmed this information. And today the Ukrainian sources are saying that as a result of that Jagger attack, the Russians destroy one big bunker where the NATO officers made that operation, created that operation of crossing the border. So that was some kind of revenge, and the Ukrainian sources are saying that Ukrainians still are not able to get the bodies from the underground and to get out from the underground, the bodies of the NATO officers. Very interesting piece of information. It's up to you to believe it or not. Maybe it's some kind of rumors or something like this. But anyway, sometimes we receive another piece of information after a few weeks or after something happened. And maybe that this is the case when talking about the situation. Furthermore, more and more Western types of units are coming on the territory of Ukraine. Leopards, Bradleys, Strikers. There are a lot of Western weapons on the territory of Ukraine, and there is just one question: when the Ukrainians are going to start? Because I believe that, of course, they will try to to save the current situation, and they will try to wait until the best things happens with the Ukrainians, the best weather they can achieve, the best situation with everything they can, and after that they will start their offensive operation. So we'll see whether the Ukrainians are able to achieve anything or not. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.